Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: Biden spoke with ceasefire advocates as his team grapples with reality of regular protests. Haley presses on against Trump on the trail. Her fight is a lonely one. Timeline: an increasingly tense dispute between Texas and the federal government. Republican National Committee plans to soon consider declaring Trump the presumptive 2024 nominee. Police officers' deadly force against a New Hampshire teenager was justified, report finds. Biden spoke with ceasefire advocates as his team grapples with reality of regular protests. CNN. President Joe Biden was working a photo line backstage on Wednesday after receiving the United Auto Workers' coveted political endorsement at its annual conference in Washington, D.C., when a small group of union members supporting a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war approached him. Biden briefly spoke with the members about their concerns, in an exchange that multiple people including Michigan Representative Debbie Dingell, who was present, described as respectful and cordial. The president also shook hands with the group and posed for photos, according to one source familiar with the matter. Haley presses on against Trump on the trail. Her fight is a lonely one. Washington Post. Nikki Haley has accused her Republican rival, Donald Trump, of throwing a temper tantrum during his New Hampshire victory speech. However, Republicans are coalescing around Trump, and Haley has been widely rejected by her party. With Trump gaining support from all corners, including Haley's home state of South Carolina, her campaign is increasingly seen as a speed bump on Trump's path to the nomination. Despite this, Haley remains confident and has vowed to stay in the race. Timeline: an increasingly tense dispute between Texas and the federal government. Washington Post. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has been at the forefront of combating the federal government's handling of a surge in people hoping to enter the United States to seek political asylum in recent years. In March 2021, Abbott initiated Operation Lone Star, which aimed to crack down on the smuggling of people and drugs into Texas. However, this operation was later investigated by the Justice Department, DOJ, for alleged civil rights violations. In March 2023, Abbott defended deploying 60 miles of razor wire along the border, even though it had not been appropriately permitted by the federal government. In June 2023, Mexico sent a diplomatic memo to the U.S. objecting to Abbott's efforts. In July 3, a Texas state trooper alleged that he had been ordered to push migrants back into the river. In July 7, Texas began installing floating barriers to block transit across the river. However, in July 24, the Justice Department sued Texas over the buoys because the state did not have permission to install them. In December 1, a federal appeals court ordered Abbott to remove the buoy barrier. However, in December 18, Abbott signed a law criminalizing illegal entry into Texas. In January 11, 2024, Texas took control of river-adjacent Shelby Park in Eagle Pass. In January 13, Representative Henry Cuellar accused Texas of allowing children to drown in the river. In January 22, the Supreme Court allowed federal authorities to continue removing razor wire at the border. In January 24, Abbott released a statement defending Texas's authority, and Texas law enforcement officers continue to put up razor wire despite the court's decision. In January 25, other Republicans supported Abbott's cause. Republican National Committee plans to soon consider declaring Trump the presumptive 2024 nominee. Associated Press. The Republican National Committee, RNC, is considering a resolution to declare Donald Trump the presumptive 2024 nominee, despite the fact that only 2 states have voted and Trump has nowhere near the number of delegates needed to secure the nomination. The move would enhance Trump's control over the party and its operations, particularly as former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is still running against Trump for the GOP nomination. If approved, the resolution would put the Republican Party in prime position to begin planning a general election campaign against President Joe Biden. Police officers' deadly force against a New Hampshire teenager was justified, report finds. Associated Press. The police shooting of a knife-wielding teenager with mental health issues on New Year's Day 2023 was justified, New Hampshire's Attorney General has said. The teenager's parents noticed changes in his behavior in 2021, and he was treated for a range of possible diagnoses, including viral infection, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder. Police responding to a 911 call found the teenager acting aggressively and shot him dead. The case has prompted the launch of a statewide effort to improve outcomes for people with mental illnesses or substance abuse disorders who come into contact with the criminal justice system. This is why nothing gets done in Congress on border policy. CNN. Bipartisan talks to find a solution to the border crisis in the U.S. are at risk of falling apart, with former President Donald Trump being blamed for the deadlock. Trump wants the border to be his main election issue, and is opposing any sort of compromise between Republicans and Democrats, even as he acknowledges the existence of a border crisis. Previous presidents have also failed in their attempts to put their names to a border compromise due to resistance from hardliners in Congress. The current situation leaves border policy, as well as funding for Ukraine and Israel, in limbo. Taking on Trump, Biden promotes infrastructure decade in Wisconsin. New York Times. President Biden traveled to Wisconsin to highlight the positive impact of the bipartisan infrastructure law and contrast his administration's economic performance with that of former President Donald Trump. The president spoke at the Blatnick Bridge, which received funding from the infrastructure law and would have failed by 2030 without the investment. Biden praised the economic growth under his administration and acknowledged that more work needs to be done. The visit comes as consumer confidence rises and fears of a recession diminish. White House stays the course on border talks, despite Trump's interference. Yahoo! The White House is not backing away from negotiations over a border deal, even as Donald Trump moves to scuttle those talks. Officials stuck to a tight script Thursday, telling reporters that the administration continues to engage while urging Republicans to do the same. They notably did not accuse the former president of trying to kill the Senate border deal that Biden aides have been negotiating for months. A new, smaller caravan of about 1,500 migrants sets out walking north from southern Mexico. Associated Press. A new caravan of around 1,500 migrants has started moving north from southern Mexico, a week after a larger group largely dissolved. Most of the new group are from Central and South America, and are tired of waiting in Mexico's southern city of Tapachula, where processing centers for asylum or visa requests are overloaded. The migrants are seeking better work opportunities and a better life for their families, with many hoping to reach the U.S. The Mexican government has been pressured by the U.S. to do more to block migrants at its border with Guatemala. Biden to host Japan PM Kishida for official visit April 10, White House says. Nikkei Asia. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will visit the United States on April 10 for an official visit and meeting with President Joe Biden. The visit will include a state dinner and discussions on strengthening political, security, economic, and people-to-people ties between the two countries. The visit comes at a challenging time for both leaders, as they face low public approval ratings and various domestic and international challenges. There are also concerns in Japan about the possibility of a second Trump presidency. Trump's White House clinic improperly handed out narcotics, report finds. Washington Post. A Pentagon probe has found that the White House medical unit provided a wide range of healthcare and pharmacy services to ineligible White House staff, in violation of federal law and regulation and DoD policy. The report also found that the facility dispensed prescription medications, including controlled substances, to ineligible White House staff. The White House medical unit is staffed by 60 personnel who provide healthcare to the president, vice president, and White House staff. Haley remains defiant as Trump ratchets up attacks on last-standing 2024 GOP rival. CNN. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is sharply criticizing Donald Trump's efforts to stop her from running in the 2024 Republican primary, taunting the former president and urging supporters to take his attacks as a compliment. Haley, who ran for president in 2016 and served as Trump's ambassador to the United Nations, has been the subject of increasingly pointed attacks by Trump, who has referred to her by her first name Nimarata and falsely claimed she is not eligible to run for president. Haley's team believes that Trump's attacks will boost her popularity in South Carolina. Trump's advisors say he views Haley as an enemy and plans to bludgeon her ahead of the state's primary on February 24, while some Republicans are pressuring Haley to drop out of the race so the party can unite around Trump. Former Trump advisor Peter Navarro sentenced to prison for defying January 6 subpoena. ABC. Peter Navarro, a trade advisor in the Trump administration, has been sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress after defying a subpoena in an investigation into the January 6, 2021, U.S. Capitol attack. The judge scolded Navarro, stating that his refusal to provide documents and testimony hindered the work of the House of Representatives Committee. Navarro plans to appeal the sentence. The panel investigated the January 6 attack and broader attempts by former President Trump to overturn his election loss to Joe Biden. Navarro is the second Trump advisor to be convicted of contempt of Congress in relation to the investigation. U.S. and Israeli intelligence chiefs to discuss second Gaza hostage deal. South China Morning Post. CIA Director William Burns and his Israeli counterpart will meet with Qatari officials to discuss a potential second hostage deal for Gaza. The U.S. and Israel have been working to secure the release of over 100 hostages taken during Hamas' attack on Israel in October. Burns and Israeli Mossad chief David Barnea will meet with Qatari Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, along with Egyptian intelligence chief Abbas Kamel. The meeting follows previous talks that helped broker a short-lived truce in November, resulting in the release of over 100 hostages. The Biden administration has expressed support for a temporary pause in the fighting in Gaza, but has not backed a ceasefire. Federal Trade Commission scrutinizes big tech's AI deals. Washington Post. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission, FTC, has launched an inquiry into tech firms' investments in leading artificial intelligence, AI, developers, amid concerns that such deals are deepening the power of a handful of companies. The regulator has demanded information from AI firm OpenAI and Microsoft, which has made multiple investments in the company. The FTC is also reviewing deals involving Amazon and Google and AI developer Anthropic. The study will analyze whether the company's investments and partnerships risk undermining competition and distorting innovation, and its findings could inform future government challenges to AI deals. U.S. sets up channel with Israel seeking answers on civilian casualties. The Globe and Mail. The United States has established a channel with Israel to discuss concerns over incidents in Gaza in which civilians have been killed or injured by the Israeli military and civilian facilities have been targeted. The channel was set up after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressed concern about reports of Israeli strikes that either hit humanitarian sites or resulted in large numbers of civilian deaths. The channel allows the U.S. to raise these issues with Israel regularly, and Israel investigates and provides feedback to the U.S. The initiative comes as the Biden administration faces mounting pressure over the high civilian death toll in Gaza. Republican strategists say their party is afraid of its own voters. The Independent. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and several other candidates have failed to effectively challenge Donald Trump because of his dominance over the Republican Party, according to former GOP insiders and strategists. They argue that Trump's ability to shape the rules of the contest has caused other politicians to forget how to campaign against vulnerable opponents. They also point to a collective cowardice among the Republican field due to an inability to attack the former president over his criminal history, with DeSantis losing his nerve after Trump's indictment. Some argue that Trump's influence has caused Republicans to be averse to running highly emotional and visual campaigns, as they fear angering his base. The failure of the candidates to challenge Trump effectively has been put down to a lack of charisma and political skill, resulting in an inability to demonstrate that they are the alpha in the race. The effect of Trump's dominance over the party has been to make GOP politicians afraid of their own voters and to render those same voters immune to the charms of normal politics, according to former Republican strategist Sarah Longwell. Hamas blasts Israel's plan to create buffer zone in Gaza as a crime. Al Jazeera. Hamas official Osama Hamdan has accused Israel of committing a crime and engaging in a blatant aggression against the Palestinian people as it attempts to create a buffer zone along its border with Gaza. Israel's military is reportedly aiming to create an informal buffer zone to prevent attackers from reaching Israeli communities near Gaza. Satellite images show the destruction of buildings and agricultural fields in the area. Jeffrey Nice, a former UN war crimes prosecutor, said Israel has no legal grounds to create a buffer zone by destroying Palestinian homes and confiscating land. Yellen, criticizing Trump, says Biden's economy has delivered gains. New York Times. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has defended the Biden administration's economic agenda, highlighting the contrast between their policies and those of the previous Trump administration. Yellen's comments came after new data showed that the U.S. economy grew by over 3% in the past year, surpassing expectations of a recession. The Biden administration is trying to convince the public that its economic strategy is delivering gains to average Americans, with a focus on investments in infrastructure, domestic manufacturing, and clean energy. Yellen also acknowledged that the administration needs more time to tackle affordability issues such as access to child care and housing. Hey there, folks! It's your favorite observer from the 6 Degrees world, Dr. Six, bringing you the latest news. Let's jump right into it. First up, we have President Biden engaging with union members advocating for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. It's always great to see politicians taking the time to listen to the concerns of their constituents, even in the midst of a busy schedule. Kudos to Biden for keeping it respectful and cordial. Next, we have Nikki Haley, the lone Republican fighting against Trump's dominance in the party. It's a tough battle for Haley as more and more Republicans are rallying behind Trump. It seems like Trump's path to the nomination is becoming smoother by the day. But hey, Haley remains defiant and confident in her campaign. Let's see how this plays out. Moving on, we have the ongoing dispute between Texas and the federal government over border policy. Governor Greg Abbott has been at the forefront of this battle, with the state facing investigations and legal challenges. Looks like this conflict is far from over, and it's definitely a situation worth keeping an eye on. In other news, the Republican National Committee is considering declaring Trump the presumptive 2024 nominee. Now hold your horses, RNC. Only 2 states have voted, and Trump is nowhere near securing the nomination. But hey, it's politics and anything can happen. Buckle up, folks, it's going to be an interesting ride. We also have a report stating that a police officer's use of deadly force against a New Hampshire teenager was justified. It's always a tragic situation when lives are lost, especially when mental health issues are involved. Hopefully, this case sparks a conversation about improving outcomes for people with mental illnesses who come into contact with the criminal justice system. Now, let's dive into the deep waters of Congress and border policy. Bipartisan talks to find a solution to the border crisis are at risk of falling apart, with none other than Donald Trump being blamed for the deadlock. Surprise, surprise. Trump seems to want the border to be his main election issue, and is opposing any sort of compromise. It's a classic case of politics getting in the way of progress. Shifting gears, U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm is urging Wall Street executives to invest in clean energy. It's great to see the government taking steps to encourage the private sector to support sustainable initiatives. Let's hope these efforts lead to positive change in the fight against climate change. And speaking of positive change, President Biden visited Wisconsin to promote his administration's economic achievements and highlight the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's always good to see leaders taking credit for their accomplishments and acknowledging the work that still needs to be done. Keep it up, Mr. President. Alright, folks, that's a wrap on today's news. Remember, I'm always here to bring you the latest updates from the 6 Degrees world. Now it's time for you to join the discussion. What are your thoughts on these news stories? Let's hear it. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.